Dice are small throwable objects with multiple resting positions, used for generating random numbers. Dice are suitable as gambling devices for games like craps and are also used in non-gambling tabletop games. A traditional die is a rounded cube, with each of its 6 faces showing a different number of dots from 1 to 6. When thrown or rolled, the die comes to rest showing on its upper surface a random integer from 1 to 6, each value being equally likely. A variety of similar devices are also described as dice. Such specialized dice may have polyhedral or irregular shapes and may have faces marked with symbols instead of numbers. They may be used to produce results other than 1 through 6. Loaded and crooked dice are designed to favor some results over others for purposes of cheating or amusement. A dice tray, a tray used to contain thrown dice, is sometimes used for gambling or board games, in particular to allow dice throws which do not interfere with other game pieces. History. Dice likely originated in ancient Near East. One of the oldest known dice games was excavated from a Mesopotamian tomb, dating back to around 24th century BCE. British archaeologist Leonard Woolley discovered the dice in the Royal Cemetery at Ur with a board game known as the Royal Game of Ur. 2 types of dice, stick dice and tetrahedral dice, were found with the board game. Unlike modern dice, the numbers on the opposite sides of Mesopotamian dice were consecutive numbers rather than numbers that add up to 7. The Egyptian game of Senet was played with dice. Senet was played before 3000 BC and up to the 2nd century AD. It was likely a racing game, but there is no scholarly consensus on the rules of Senet. Dicing is mentioned as an Indian game in the Rig Veda, Atharva Veda and Buddha games list. There are several biblical references to casting lots, as in Psalm chapter 22, indicating that dicing was commonplace when the psalm was composed. It is theorized that dice developed from the practice of fortune-telling with the tailless of hoofed animals, colloquially known as knucklebones. But knucklebones is not the oldest divination technique that incorporates randomness. Knucklebones was a game of skill played by women and children. A derivative form had the 4 sides of the bone receive different values and counters. Modern dice. Although gambling was illegal, many Romans were passionate gamblers that enjoyed dicing, which was known as alim ludia. Dicing was even a popular pastime of emperors. Letters by Augustus to Tacitus and his daughter recount his hobby of dicing. There were 2 sizes of Roman dice. Tali were large dice inscribed with 1, 3, 4, and 6 on 4 sides. Tesserae were smaller dice with sides numbered from 1 to 6. 20-sided dice date back to the 2nd century AD and from Ptolemaic Egypt as early as 2nd century BC. Dominoes and playing cards originated in China as developments from dice. The transition from dice to playing cards occurred in China around the Tang dynasty, and coincides with the technological transition from rolls of manuscripts to block-printed books. In Japan, dice were used to play a popular game called Sugoroku. There are 2 types of Sugoroku. Ban Sugoroku is similar to backgammon and dates back to the Heian period, while Sugoroku is a racing game. Usage. Dice are thrown onto a flat surface either from the hand or from a container designed for this. The face of the die that is uppermost when it comes to rest provides the value of the throw. One typical dice game today is craps, where 2 dice are thrown at a time and wagers are made on the total value of the 2 dice. Dice are frequently used to randomize moves in board games, usually by deciding the distance through which a piece will move along the board. Examples of this are backgammon and Monopoly. The result of a die roll is determined by the way it is thrown, according to the laws of classical mechanics. A die roll is made random by uncertainty and minor factors such as tiny movements in the thrower's hand. They are thus a crude form of hardware random number generator. Perhaps to mitigate against concerns that the pips on the faces of certain styles of dice cause a small bias, casinos use precision dice with flush markings. Construction. Arrangement. Common dice are small cubes, most commonly 1.6 cm across, whose faces are numbered from 1 to 6, usually by patterns of round dots called pips. Opposite sides of a die traditionally add up to 7, implying that the 1, 2 and 3 faces share a vertex. These faces may be placed clockwise or counterclockwise about this vertex. If the 1, 2 and 3 faces run counterclockwise, the die is called right-handed, and if those faces run clockwise, the die is called left-handed. Western dice are normally right-handed, and Chinese dice are normally left-handed. The pips on dice are arranged in specific patterns as shown. Asian-style dice bear similar patterns to Western ones, but the pips are closer to the center of the face. In addition, the pips are differently sized on Asian-style dice, and the pips are colored red on the 1 and 4 sides. One possible explanation is that red 4s are of Indian origin. In some older sets, the 1 pip is a colorless depression. Manufacturing non-precision dice are manufactured via the plastic injection molding process. The pips or numbers on the dice are a part of the mold. The coloring for numbering is achieved by submerging the dice entirely in paint, which is allowed to dry, and then polished via a tumble finishing process similar to rock polishing. The abrasive agent scrapes off all of the paint except for the indents of the numbering. A finer abrasive is then used to polish the die. This process also creates the smoother, rounded edges on the dice. Precision casino dice may have a polished or sand finish, making them transparent or translucent respectively. Casino dice have their pips drilled, then filled flush with a paint of the same density as the material used for the dice, such that the center of gravity of the dice is as close to the geometric center as possible. All such dice are stamped with a serial number to prevent potential cheaters from substituting a die. Precision backgammon dice are made the same way. They tend to be slightly smaller and have rounded corners and edges, to allow better movement inside the dice cup and stop forceful rolls from damaging the playing surface. Terms. While the terms ace, deuce, trey, cater, sink and size have been made obsolete by 1 to 6, they are still used by some professional gamblers to designate different sides of the dice. Ace is from the Latin as, meaning, a unit, the others are 2 to 6 in Old French. Notation. In many gaming contexts, especially tabletop role-playing games, it is common to see shorthand notations representing different dice rolls. A, D, or D is used to indicate a die with a specific number of sides, D4 indicating a 4-sided die. For example, if several dice of the same type are to be rolled, this is indicated by a leading number specifying the number of dice. Hence, 68 means the player should roll 6 8-sided dice and add the results. Modifiers to a die roll can also be indicated as desired. For example, 3d6 plus 4 instructs the player to roll 3 6-sided dice, calculate the total, and add 4 to it. Loaded dice. A loaded, weighted or crooked die is one that has been tampered with so that it will land with a specific side facing upwards more or less often than a fair die would. There are several methods for creating loaded dice, including round faces, off-square faces and weights. Tappers have a mercury drop in a reservoir at the center, with a capillary tube leading to another reservoir at a side. The load is activated by tapping the die so that the mercury travels to the side. Another type of loaded die is hollow with a small weight and a semi-solid substance inside whose melting point is just lower than the temperature of the human body, allowing the cheater to change the loading of the die by applying body heat, causing the semi-solid to melt and the weight to drift down, making the chosen opposite face more likely to land up. A less common type of loaded die can be made by inserting a magnet into the die and embedding a coil of wire in the game table. Running current through the coil increases the likelihood of a certain side landing on the bottom, depending on the direction of the current. Transparent acetate dice, used in all reputable casinos, are harder to tamper with than other dice. A die may be shaved on one side, making it slightly shorter in one dimension, thus affecting its outcome. One countermeasure employed by casinos against shaved dice is to measure the dice with a micrometer before playing. Representation. Using Unicode characters, the faces can be shown in text using the range U plus 2680 to U plus 2685 or using decimal and number 9856 to and number 9861. Variants. Polyhedral dice. Around the end of the 1960s, non-cubical dice became popular among players of war games, and since have been employed extensively in role-playing games and trading card games. Reciprocally symmetric numerals like 6 and 9 are distinguished with a dot or underline. Standard variations dice are often sold in sets, matching in color, of 5 or 6 different shapes. They are also sold frequently with a second 10-sided die of a complementary or contrasting color. Sometimes, dice are sold additionally with a die resembling the 5 platonic solids, whose faces are regular polygons, or the pentagonal trapezohedron die, whose faces are 10 kites, each with 2 different edge lengths, 3 different angles, and 2 different kinds of vertices. The other 4 platonic solids are the most common non-cubical dice. These can have 4, 8, 12, and 20 faces. The only other common non-cubical die is the 10-sided die. Using these dice in various ways, games can closely approximate the real probability distributions of the events they simulate. For instance, 10-sided dice can be rolled in pairs to produce a uniform distribution of random percentages, and summing the values of multiple dice will produce approximations to normal distributions. Unlike other common dice, a 4-sided die does not have a side that faces upward when it is at rest on a surface, so it has to be read in a different way. Many such dice have the numbers printed around the points, so that when it settles, the numbers at the vertex pointing up are the same and the one counted. Alternately, the numbers on a tetrahedral die can be placed at the middle of the edges, in which case the numbers around the base are read. Normally, the faces on a die will be placed so opposite faces will add up to 1 more than the number of faces. Some dice, such as those with 10 sides, are usually numbered sequentially beginning with 0, in which case the opposite faces will add to 1 less than the number of faces. Rarer variations, uniform fair dice, are dice where all faces have equal probability of outcome, which follows from the symmetry of the die, and include platonic solids, the 5 regular polyhedra, 4, 6, 8, 12, 20 sides, Catalan solids, the duals of the 13 Archimedean solids, 12, 24, 30, 48, 60, 120 sides, bipyramids, the duals of the infinite set of prisms, with triangle faces, any even number above 4, and usually divisible by 4 so that a face will face up. Trapezohedrons, the duals of the infinite set of antiprisms, with kite faces, any even number above 4. Dysphenoids, an infinite set of tetrahedra made from congruent non-regular triangles. 4 sides. Dice with an odd number of flat faces can be made as long dice. They are based on an infinite set of prisms. All the faces they may actually land on are congruent, so they are equally fair. Non-numeric, the faces of most dice are labeled using sequences of whole numbers, usually starting at 1, expressed with either pips or digits. However, there are some applications that require results other than numbers. Examples include letters for Boggle, directions for Warhammer Fantasy Battle, playing card symbols for poker dice, and instructions for sexual acts using sex dice. Fudge Dice, a cubical dice featuring 2 sides marked with plus signs, 2 with minus signs, and 2 blank. These are rolled in groups of 4, with each plus sign adding to the total, while each minus sign reduces it. Blank sides are ignored. This generates a range between -4 and +4. Spherical dice. A die can be constructed in the shape of a sphere, with the addition of an internal cavity in the shape of the dual polyhedron of the desired die shape and an internal weight. The weight will settle in one of the points of the internal cavity, causing it to settle with one of the numbers uppermost. For instance, a sphere with an octahedral cavity and a small internal weight will settle with one of the 6 points of the cavity held downwards by the weight. Application in role-playing games. The fantasy role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons is largely credited with popularizing dice in such games. Some games use only one type, like Exalted, which uses only 10-sided dice. Others use numerous types for different game purposes, such as D&D, which makes use of all common polyhedral dice. Dice are used to determine the outcome of events. Such usage is called a check. Games typically determine results either as a total on one or more dice above or below a fixed number, or a certain number of rolls above a certain number on one or more dice. Due to circumstances or character skill, the initial roll may have a number added to or subtracted from the final result, or have the player roll extra or fewer dice. To keep track of rolls easily, dice notation is frequently used. A common special case is percentile rolls, referred to as 1d100 or 1d%. Since actual 100-sided dice are large, almost spherical, and difficult to read, percentile rolls are instead handled by rolling two 10-sided dice together, using one as the tens, and the other as the units. A roll of 10 or 0 on either die is taken as a 0, unless both are zeros or tens, in which case this is 100. Some sets of percentile dice explicitly mark one die in tens and the other in units to avoid ambiguity. Dice for role-playing games are usually plastic. Early polyhedral dice from the 1970s and 1980s were made of a soft plastic that would easily wear with use, which would gradually render them unusable. Many early dice were unmarked, and players took great care in painting them. Some 20-sided dice then were numbered 0 through 9 twice. Half of the numbers had to be painted a contrasting color to differentiate faces. These could double as a 10-sided die by ignoring the distinguishing coloring. Application in board games. Many board games use dice to randomize how far pieces move or to settle conflicts. Typically, this has meant that rolling higher numbers is better. Some games, such as Axis and Allies, have inverted this system by making the lower values more potent. In the modern age, a few games and game designers have approached dice in a different way by making each side of the die similarly valuable. In Castles of Burgundy, players spend their dice to take actions based on the D's value. In this game, a 6 is not better than a 1, or vice versa. In Warriors, different sides of the dice can offer completely different abilities. Several sides often give resources while others grant the player useful actions. Application in divination. Dice can be used for divination, and using dice for such a purpose is called cleromancy. A pair of common dice is usual, though other forms of polyhedra can be used. Tibetan Buddhists sometimes use this method of divination. It is highly likely that the Pythagoreans used the Platonic solids as dice. They refer to such dice as the dice of the gods, and they sought to understand the universe through an understanding of geometry and polyhedra. Astrological dice are a specialized set of 3 12-sided dice for divination. The first die represents planets, the sun, the moon, and the nodes of the moon. The second die represents the 12 zodiac signs, and the third represents the 12 houses. An icosahedron provides the answers of the magic 8-ball, conventionally used to provide answers to yes or no questions.